It's something we do all the time. You click buy, you tap your card, you hand over some cash. It feels so instant. But legally, the exact moment that that thing you just bought actually becomes yours is a surprisingly tricky question. So let's pull back the curtain on this hidden journey.
And to see why this matters, let's start with a bit of a nightmare scenario, shall we? Imagine you find a rare book. You pay for it right there on the spot. But before you can even walk out the door, the whole shop burns to the ground. So what happens? Do you get your money back, or did you just lose a book you already owned? The answer to that question all comes down to timing.
To get our heads around this, we have to understand a really key legal idea. There's a huge difference between possession and ownership. Possession is easy. It just means you're physically holding it. But ownership, that's about who has the legal rights to it. And here's the crazy part. You can have one without the other. This little distinction is exactly why our bookshop problem is so complicated.
So how do we figure out when that legal right, that ownership, actually changes hands? Well, it all starts with a simple question. What did you and the seller actually want to happen?
See, the number one most fundamental rule is all about intent. The law says that property, the ownership, is transferred at the exact moment the people making the deal intend for it to be transferred. It's supposed to be a meeting of the minds.
Right. But when was the last time you bought something and said, I hereby intend to take ownership of this coffee at precisely 9:15 a.m.? It just doesn't happen. So for all those times when our intentions aren't spelt out, which is pretty much all the time, the law has a set of default rules to figure it out for us.
And that brings us to the real heart of this explainer. We're going to walk through some of the most common situations to see when that ownership switch actually gets flipped.
Okay, first up, the most straightforward case. The item is right there, it's ready to go, nothing else needs to be done to it. Think about grabbing that specific book off a shelf or picking out that car on the dealer's lot.
Now here is the absolute kicker for our burning bookshop scenario. For these ready-to-go items, the law says ownership passes the second the deal is made. It doesn't matter if you haven't paid yet. It doesn't matter if you haven't taken it home. The moment you agreed to buy it, that book was legally yours. And unfortunately, so is the risk.
Okay, but what if things are a bit more complicated? What if the seller has to do something to the item before you can take it? Maybe they have to weigh it, or measure it, or in this case, assemble that new piece of furniture for you.
In this situation, ownership waits. It doesn't pass until two very specific things have happened. First, the seller has to finish whatever it is they need to do. And second, and this part is crucial, you, the buyer, have to be told that it's done. Only then does that item become yours.
A classic old case called Rugg versus Minette illustrates this perfectly. A buyer agreed to purchase a huge amount of oil that was stored in a big tank. The seller started the job of putting the oil into casks for the buyer. Well, a fire broke out and destroyed everything. The court had to decide who owned what, and they drew a literal line. The buyer owned the oil that was already in the casks, so they took that loss. But the oil still in the giant tank? That still belonged to the seller. What a lesson in timing, huh?
All right, what about the whole try before you buy situation? You know, when a store lets you take something home to see if you like it. This is super common, especially with things like jewelry, and it has its own set of rules.
So how does that necklace you're trying out become yours? Well, the law says it happens in one of three ways. The obvious one, you call the seller and say, I love it, I'm keeping it. Or you could do something that acts like you own it, like, say, trying to sell it to your friend. And then there's the one that catches people out. You just do nothing. If you keep it past the return date, or even just what the law considers a reasonable time without saying you're rejecting it, well, congratulations, you just bought it.
Now, up to this point, we've been assuming something pretty basic, that the person selling the item actually owns it. But what if they don't? This is where things get really, really interesting.
It all starts with this old foundational legal maxim written in Latin that really governs the whole world of sales.
It's pronounced nemo dat quod non habet, and it means no one can give what he has not got. The idea is pretty simple, right? If a thief steals a watch and sells it to you, you don't actually get to be the true owner, because the thief never had real ownership to give you in the first place. Seems like a pretty absolute rule.
Well, not quite. To keep the world of business from grinding to a halt and to protect innocent buyers, the law has carved out some really important and surprising exceptions to this rule.
And this is where the law tries to be practical. It basically says that in certain situations, an innocent buyer who has no reason to be suspicious should be protected.
So, for example, if you buy a used car in good faith from a proper car dealership, you get to keep it, even if there was some shady ownership history before it got to the lot. The law creates these specific exceptions to protect people like you and me, and to make sure we can all trust the marketplace.
Okay, this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, delivery, the actual physical handover of the goods. And I'm going to say this again because it is so important. Delivery is not the same as ownership. They are two totally separate legal events. As we saw with the bookshop, ownership can transfer way before the item is ever delivered. Don't mix them up.
In fact, the law even recognizes 3 different kinds of delivery. There's actual delivery, that's what we normally think of, physically handing something over. Then there's symbolic delivery, like when you're given the keys to a new car or a warehouse. And finally, there's constructive delivery, which is a bit weird. It's when a seller just acknowledges that they're now holding the goods for you, even if nothing has physically moved an inch.
So, after all these rules and scenarios and Latin phrases, what's the one thing you absolutely have to remember from all of this? It boils down to a very simple 3-word phrase.
Risk follows ownership. That is the whole ball game. Remember our burning bookshop? This principle is what decides who's out of luck. Whoever legally owns the item at the moment disaster strikes is the one who bears the risk. If it gets destroyed, it's the owner's problem. And that is why figuring out that exact moment of transfer is so incredibly important.
So the next time you click Buy Now or tap your card, you might just find yourself wondering, at what exact millisecond did that thing truly become mine? It's a hidden legal journey that happens with every single purchase. And now, you've got the map.